if you would. By the way, before we begin, anytime I tend to think that this summer was really rotten and I look outside and I think of everything and I feel sorry for myself, I look at the gentleman who's walked back. Matt, it's so good to see you. Nothing was like your summer. Welcome, Matt. God bless you. How are you feeling?
Fine. I just can't sit for very long.
I'll keep the sermon short, okay? That'll make you their favorite.
Yeah. So if I stand up, it's...
Right. Well, actually, that's good, because I want everyone to stand up for a second. Please. Let's show us up. Okay? As you are able, as you're capable, stay standing. Al, if you are a sinner, remain standing. No, if you are a sinner, sit out. And anyone who's not a sinner can remain standing.
You're standing.
I'm standing. That's why they pay him the big bucks. Sharon came up to me today and said, "Oh my gosh, those readings are harsh." Ann said the readings are harsh. Yeah, get used to it. These readings are harsh. And yet they are a great challenge. 3 stories. A lost sheep, a lost coin, and the third part of the story you've already heard. You know it by heart. We actually heard it months ago during Lent. A lost son. Luke puts all 3 together. He remembers a time when Jesus annoyed people by associating with those that we don't think count. And God thinks does count. So the first opening line is, if you are a sinner, you are welcome here, because that's who Jesus came out to seek. If you are perfect, if you are holier than any of us, you are free to leave. Know your setting, know your audience, know yourself. An old man by the name of Paul is in jail. It's the end of his life as far as we've been told. And he writes to the head of the Christian community in Ephesus now. His name is Timothy, who was a protege, convert of his. And Paul knows he's going to die. And in that wonderful letter, that great phrase, "I know this, Christ came to save sinners, and I can tell you, I was among the worst." And he says this with great acknowledgement of who and what he is. So Jesus is now on this journey to Jerusalem, and he's gathering big crowds around him. And all of a sudden, the professional holy people, mostly men, but not all, those who are scribes, the legal establishment, religious legal establishment, and those who are Pharisees, part of the cult of those who are holier than others. And they are grumbling because they don't like the company that Jesus keeps. They don't want to hear about God radically loving and welcoming home people who really repent, because you can't really trust people who repent. And most of us in our heart of hearts, we love it when someone gets caught and they suffer the consequences for what they did. In our hearts, we all do. Well, I'll speak for myself. I won't speak for you. I tried this at St. Paul's last night, and the only guy who actually was honest about it was Jim Follett. He actually said, "Yeah, I agree with you." Everyone else kept their mouths shut, and I knew they were lying. Did any of you feel when the sentence of, what was her name, Felicity, that one, the whole scandal involved paying someone to change her daughter's entrance scores, and that fraudulent note that she wrote, which obviously someone wrote for her. Anyone in your heart of hearts really wish she had gotten much more? You know? Oh, let me see. How many honest people we have here? Raise your hands if you really felt that. I raised my hand, Follett raised his, nobody else did. All right, interesting. Okay. And Jesus says, "You know what? I understand exactly how you feel, and yet that's not how God is." And boy, that's annoying. Why is God so forgiving, so welcoming, so heretical? Well, let me tell you a story. 3 stories, in fact. It's about a coin and a sheep and a kid, a young man. It is about dim-witted sheep who wanders off, and someone who loves that sheep so much will act so recklessly that he will leave the others alone and go and try to find that one and try to make it come back. And I always tell the story, and I don't mean to be offensive when I say this. Logan, you will experience this. Lorena, you know this in your heart already. We guys, as we get older, we know this. Other than teenage boys, sheep are the dumbest life form on planet. Okay? That is who we are. We know it in our hearts. Okay? And we can look back years later and say, yeah, that was me. All right? And that's the type of sheep that Jesus describes. And everyone has this wonderful image. I mean, even at the seminary where I teach once a week, it's the chapel, the General Seminary is the chapel of the Good Shepherd. And they have this wonderful image of Christ carrying the sheep on his shoulders. It's a warming image that touches our hearts. No one gets how radical and how out of proportion what is being described. It makes no sense. So let me tell you the same parable using a more 21st century description. Which one of you adults taking 100 Cub Scouts, Girl Scouts, down to the Museum of Art down in Manhattan, stops at the subway in the South Bronx and loses one of those kids, leaves the other 99 kids there to fend for themselves on that subway station all alone and goes searching for the kid who's lost? Not one of you would do that. You'd leave them all there alone by themselves?
With the other counselor.
Well, no, I didn't say that, because the shepherd is by himself. Which one of you would leave them? That's the description he gives. It makes no sense. That's the whole point. God makes no sense by our standards because in God's eyes, each of us has such value, infinite value, that God seeks us out, even when we totally screw up. All we need to do is acknowledge it and come back, and God welcomes us. The image of the prodigal son, the one thing we always forget. We forget the kid who wanders off and does what he wants, and he comes back. We forget the image that who is waiting for him way down the road is the Father welcoming the Son. Because I knew you'd come home if you'd come to your senses. Or the woman with the coin. You women get part of this too. She owns 10 coins as part of her dowry, because in that culture at that time, that's the only money any woman would own, would be her dowry. She loses 1/10 of it. Probably not a lot. And the point of the story is, who's going to lose 1/10 of their dowry, a coin, search the house, clean the house, find it, and then throw a party where you're going to end up spending more money than what the coin was worth? There was humor in that story, and yet, again, the zing. God doesn't go by the way we measure things, because God's love and mercy is beyond measure. This is about how God sees us. This is about the realization that with God's strength, yes, I am a sinner. And as I turn back to the Lord will forgive. And nothing is beyond that. In our minds, you lose a sheep, it's a tax write-off. You lose a coin, get another. Miserable excuse for a son, don't even go there. What Jesus teaches is offensive. What Jesus teaches us is that as sinners, we are still loved and welcomed home. All we have to do is open our ears, open our eyes, let the Spirit guide us, and come home.
Amen.